Imagine a machine built to haul, tow, and grind through the workday without a drop of fuel. Something that carries the weight of American identity on a silent powertrain and dares skeptics to call it a compromise. Picture the tension between tradition and transformation as longtime truck buyers start seeing torque without tailpipes and power without pistons. Some lean in with curiosity, others flinch at the idea that the future might not rumble. This isn't just about specs or battery packs. It's about whether a decades-old symbol of strength can flip its own legacy without losing the people who made it matter. The stakes sit in garages, job sites, highways, and hearts across the country, and every success or misstep sends a message to competitors waiting to copy or pounce. If one electric pickup can rewrite the rules of loyalty and utility, it won't just sell vehicles, it'll shift the language of capability. Like and subscribe, then drop a comment on which model or era should get the deep dive next. The Ford F-150 Lightning entered the market carrying a nameplate that has anchored American truck culture for generations. And its development was never just a technical exercise, it was a reputational gamble. From the moment Ford committed to electrifying its best-selling model, every decision carried layered consequences. Alienate a loyal base by changing the formula too much, or fall behind by refusing to innovate quickly. Engineers had to balance the realities of battery weight, towing demands, and range expectations with a familiar silhouette and cabin experience that wouldn't frighten off longtime truck owners who equate quiet operation with weakness. The styling stayed recognizable because it had to. The cabin kept its upright stance and broad usability because that was non-negotiable for buyers who live in their trucks as much as they drive them. Even the choice to maintain a traditional frame structure rather than switching to a radical new platform reflected an understanding that electrification had to feel like a continuation, not an erasure. Pricing strategy leaned into incentives and fleet appeal, banking on early adoption from businesses that calculate fuel and maintenance at scale. Yet behind every public reveal and glossy spec sheet was a deeper question about durability, repairability, and real-world charging access, especially in regions where infrastructure remains a patchwork rather than a promise. Owners willing to make the leap brought their skepticism with them. And Ford had to address doubts not just with marketing, but with warranty coverage, over-the-air update capability, and dealer training across a broad national network. Early feedback revealed how towing range loss became a hot-button topic, and it forced conversations about what constitutes acceptable compromise in an electric workhorse. Ford leveraged its parts supply chain and brand familiarity to reassure hesitant buyers, but that didn't erase concerns about resale value and long-term battery performance. Throughout development, leadership watched how a rival startup positioned its own electric pickup as a lifestyle product rather than a work truck, creating a contrast in philosophy that sometimes helped and sometimes complicated perception. The existence of that competitor validated the electric pickup segment, but also pressured Ford to prove that legacy could coexist with disruption rather than be replaced by it. Every milestone, from prototype testing to the first customer deliveries, functioned as a referendum on whether an electric version of a cultural staple could honor tradition while rewriting core assumptions about what a truck is supposed to be. The Ford F-150 Lightning stepped into a market climate shaped by rising fuel costs, shifting regulations, and a growing chorus of skeptics and advocates who saw electric pickups as either the future of utility or a marketing stunt. Public curiosity surged when early reservation numbers spiked, but that didn't guarantee long-term loyalty. Fleet managers, contractors, and everyday drivers waited to see whether charging downtime, payload impacts, and cold weather range would undermine the promise. The rollout arrived as infrastructure lagged behind ambition. Charging networks in rural and work-oriented regions remained inconsistent, and that gave critics room to question whether a battery-powered truck could realistically replace internal combustion in high-demand scenarios. Ford leaned into partnerships and home charging solutions to soften those edges, emphasizing overnight replenishment for homeowners and businesses while acknowledging that widespread fast charging coverage was still catching up. At the same time, aftermarket interest began to grow, though it took a different form than traditional tuner culture. Rather than chasing horsepower or custom exhaust notes, owners focused on software tweaks, storage upgrades, overlanding accessories, and solutions to extend range under load. The conversation around towing trailers, boats, and equipment became a lightning rod, pun unintended, for debate, with real-world tests showing how quickly range could disappear under stress. Some drivers adapted by planning routes around stops and regenerative braking opportunities, while others concluded the technology wasn't ready to replace long-haul or heavy-duty tasks without compromise. The presence of another manufacturer offering a more boutique, lifestyle-oriented electric pickup added complexity by splitting audience expectations. One camp craved rugged practicality, the other leaned toward eco-focused adventure and premium tech cabins. For Ford, this created both competition and contrast. It could pitch the F-150 Lightning as the electric truck for people who already rely on trucks, not just those drawn to novelty. Regulatory shifts and incentive programs kept pressure on production timelines and pricing, especially as supply chains for batteries and semiconductors strained under global demand. Meanwhile, dealership networks faced the challenge of educating consumers on maintenance differences, software updates, and charging etiquette, all while addressing fears about resale value and long-term battery costs. As momentum grew, analysts and insiders raised questions about how Ford would scale production without eroding profit margins, and whether early adopters would stay loyal once the novelty faded and real ownership patterns emerged. The segment's visibility made every issue, whether a delivery delay, a charging complaint, or a software glitch, amplified across forums, news outlets, and social channels. All of that pressure set the stage for the most pivotal phase, determining whether early hype and brand heritage could translate into sustained relevance and a blueprint others would be forced to follow. The Ford F-150 Lightning now lives in an environment where its success or failure informs how manufacturers approach electrification in segments that were once considered untouchable. As feedback from owners accumulates, patterns emerge about what works and what needs refinement, range expectations during winter hauling, long-term battery health for fleet duty, and the economics of charging compared to traditional fuel. Ford has begun adjusting production strategies, trimming or expanding output based on demand cycles and external economic pressures, signaling that the experiment has moved into a data-driven maturity phase. The presence of a rival with a more niche premium approach has forced Ford to justify why mainstream scale matters and why infrastructure, dealer support, and parts availability can outweigh startup flash. Yet the Lightning's long-term influence stretches beyond current buyers. It has become a litmus test for how everyday Americans might accept electric power in roles once considered sacredly mechanical. Enthusiasts debate whether the quiet torque and digital interfaces will erode identity or unlock new forms of utility. Especially as next-generation models promise improved charging times, lighter battery materials, and configurable work solutions. The truck's real legacy may not be measured in early sales figures, but in how it shifts the expectations of younger consumers, municipalities, and industries that traditionally lean on internal combustion. Each revision and refresh in the coming years will reflect lessons learned under pressure. Thermal management tweaks for demanding climates, software updates that optimize towing calculations, and strategic partnerships to build charging corridors where contractors and travelers actually drive. The conversation has evolved from whether an electric pickup can exist to how it should adapt and who will refine the formula. The Lightning's trajectory will determine whether it becomes a transitional icon or the foundation for a new standard in capability and identity, and it leaves little room for complacency. What seemed like a daring gamble now functions as both a roadmap and a warning sign to every other manufacturer eyeing the same territory. And its next chapter will reveal whether legacy can scale innovation without losing cultural resonance. The Ford F-150 Lightning entered the electric market with expectations that went far beyond novelty. And understanding its place in the U.S. landscape means looking at how ownership, pricing, and practicality translate into daily life. Buyers drawn to the Lightning either come from decades of truck ownership or from newer interest in electrification. And both groups weigh the same questions: how far it can travel with a trailer attached, whether charging time disrupts routines, and how maintenance compares with engines they understand. For many, the initial cost feels steep, even with incentives, but the long-term math shifts when lower energy costs, reduced servicing needs, and potential tax benefits are factored in. Availability varies by region and dealership allocation, and some buyers face wait times that test their patience, especially as production adjusts to shifting market demand. Used models are slowly appearing, giving hesitant consumers a chance to enter the segment without the full upfront commitment. Though uncertainty about resale value and battery degradation still colors the conversation, reliability has proven more nuanced than critics predicted. The absence of traditional drivetrain components eliminates many common failure points. Yet software issues, charging quirks, and occasional electronic faults remind owners that this is a first-generation effort. Service networks trained on electric platforms help reduce downtime, but consistency depends on how seriously each dealership invests in specialized training and equipment. Infrastructure remains a decisive factor. Those with home charging find daily use seamless, while drivers dependent on public stations navigate availability, speed, and cost with mixed experiences. In states and municipalities pushing fleet electrification, the Lightning's practicality in construction, utility services, and public work settings signals how policy and product evolve together. Insurance rates, accessory compatibility, and warranty coverage continue to influence adoption, especially for families and businesses that depend on predictable operating costs. The presence of another electric pickup from a rival manufacturer gives consumers a point of comparison. But the Lightning's advantage lies in familiarity, parts access. Cabin layout, towing interfaces, and brand history make the learning curve less intimidating. As production evolves and updates bring incremental improvements to range, charging, and software, ownership will likely feel less experimental and more foundational. Buyers today act as test pilots and early adopters, shaping the expectations of everyone watching from the sidelines. The key takeaway is that the Lightning isn't simply a truck with a battery. It's a case study in whether America's most entrenched vehicle category can transition without losing identity or utility. Pricing will fluctuate with supply chains and incentives, but the long-term trajectory points toward more trims, broader fleet options, and integration with home energy systems. What it means to own a truck is being rewritten in real time, and those who pay attention now will be better positioned to choose wisely as successors arrive. The story of this model doesn't end with its first generation. It opens the door to a new definition of strength that no longer depends on combustion, but still carries the weight of tradition. The real test isn't whether it replaces the past. It's whether it builds a future drivers can recognize and trust.